Operation Savannah was the South African Defence Forces 1975–1976 covert intervention in the Angolan War of Independence, and the subsequent Angolan Civil War. Background: the so-called Carnation Revolution of the 25th of April 1974 ended Portugal's colonial government, but Angola's three main liberation forces, National Liberation Front of Angola, National Union for the Total Independence of Angola and the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, began competing for dominance in the country. Fighting began in November 1974, starting in the capital city, Luanda, and spreading quickly across all of Angola, which was soon divided among the combatants. The FNLA occupied northern Angola and UNITA the central south, while the MPLA mostly occupied the coastline, the far southeast, and, after capturing it in November 1974, Cabinda. Negotiations for independence resulted in the Treaty of Alvor being signed on 15 January 1975, naming the date of official independence as the 11th of November 1975. The agreement ended the war for independence but marked the escalation of the Civil War. Two dissenting groups, the Front for the Liberation of the Enclave of Cabinda and the Eastern Revolt, never signed the accords, as they were excluded from negotiations. The coalition government established by the Treaty of Alvor soon ended as nationalist factions, doubting one another's intentions, tried to control the country by force. Fighting between the three forces resumed in Luanda hardly a day after the transitional government assumed office on 15 January 1975. The liberation forces sought to seize strategic points, most importantly the capital, by the official day of independence. The MPLA managed to seize Luanda from the FLNA whilst UNITA retreated from the capital. By March 1975, the FNLA was driving towards Luanda from the north, joined by units of the Zairean army which the United States had encouraged Zaire to provide. Between the 28th of April and early May, 1,200 Zairean troops crossed into northern Angola to assist the FNLA. The FNLA eliminated all remaining MPLA presence in the northern provinces and assumed positions east of Kifangondo on the eastern outskirts of Luanda, from where it continued to encroach on the capital. The situation for the MPLA in Luanda became increasingly precarious. The MPLA received supplies from the Soviet Union and repeatedly requested 100 officers for military training from Cuba. Until late August, Cuba had a few technical advisors deployed in Angola. By the 9th of July, the MPLA gained control of the capital, Luanda. Starting the 21st of August, Cuba established four training facilities with almost 500 men, which were to train about 4,800 FAPLA recruits in 3 to 6 months. The mission was expected to be short-term and to last about 6 months. The Circle in Cabinda accounted for 191 instructors, while Benguela, Saurimo and Atinde Latando had 66 or 67 instructors each. Some were posted in headquarters in Luanda or in other places throughout the country. The training centers were operational by 18 to 20 October. Military intervention. South African Defence Force involvement in Angola, part of the interrelated South African Border War and Namibian War of Independence, started in 1966 when the Southwest African People's Organization commenced an armed struggle for Namibian independence. SWAPO officials founded an armed wing, the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, which operated from bases in Zambia and rural Ovamboland. With the loss of the Portuguese colonial administration as an ally and the possibility of new regimes sympathetic to SWAPO in Lisbon's former colonies, Pretoria recognized that it would lose a valued cordon sanitaire between Southwest Africa and the frontline states. Plan could seek sanctuary in Angola, and South Africa would be faced with another hostile regime and potentially militarized border to cross in pursuit of Namibian guerrillas, with both the Soviet Union and the United States arming major factions in the Angolan Civil War. The conflict escalated into a major Cold War battleground. South Africa offered advisory and technical assistance to UNITA, while a number of Cuban combat troops entered the country to fight alongside the Marxist MPLA. Moscow also plied its Angolan clients with heavy weapons. American aid to UNITA and the FNLA was initially undertaken with Operation IA feature, but this was terminated by the Clark Amendment in October 1976. Aid would not yet return until after the repeal of the Clark Amendment in 1985. China subsequently recalled its military advisors from Zaire, ending its tacit support for the FNLA. Cuban instructors began training plan in Zambia in April 1975, and the movement had 3,000 new recruits by April. Guerrilla activity intensified. Election boycotts were staged in Ovamboland, and the Ovambo chief minister assassinated. South Africa responded by calling up more reservists and placing existing security forces along the border on standby. Raids into Angola became commonplace after July 15. Support for UNITA and FNLA. Consequently, with the covert assistance of the United States through the Central Intelligence Agency, it began assisting UNITA and the FNLA in a bid to ensure that a neutral or friendly government in Luanda prevail. On the 14th of July 1975, South African Prime Minister Balthazar Vorster approved weapons worth US $14 million to be bought secretly for FNLA and UNITA, of which the first shipments from South Africa arrived in August 1975. Ruakanakadok occupation. On 9 August 1975, a 30-man SADF patrol moved some 50 kilometers into southern Angola and occupied the Ruakanakadok hydroelectric complex and other installations on the Cunene River. The scheme was an important strategic asset for Ovamboland, which relied on it for its water supply. The facility had been completed earlier in the year with South African funding. Several hostile incidences with UNITA and SWAPO frightening foreign workers had provided a rationale for the occupation. The defense of the facility in southern Angola also was South Africa's justification for the first permanent deployment of regular SADF units inside Angola. On the 22nd of August 1975, the SADF initiated Operation Sausage II, a major raid against SWAPO in southern Angola, and on the 4th of September 1975, Vorster authorized the provision of limited military training, advice and logistical assistance. In turn, FNLA and UNITA would help the South Africans fight SWAPO. Meanwhile, the MPLA had gained against UNITA in southern Angola and by mid-October was in control of 12 of Angola's provinces and most cities. UNITA's territory had been shrinking to parts of central Angola, and it became apparent that UNITA did not have any chance of capturing Luanda by Independence Day, which neither the United States nor South Africa were willing to accept. The SADF established a training camp near Silva Porto and prepared the defenses of Nova Lisboa. They assembled the Mobile Attack Unit Foxbat to stop approaching FAPLA units with which it clashed on the 5th of October, thus saving Nova Lisboa for UNITA. Task Force Zulu. On 14 October, the South Africans secretly initiated Operation Savannah when Task Force Zulu, the first of several South African columns, crossed from Namibia into Cubango. The operation provided for elimination of the MPLA from the southern border area, then from southwestern Angola, from the central region, and finally for the capture of Luanda. According to John Stockwell, a former CIA officer, there was close liaison between the CIA and the South Africans, and high officials in Pretoria claimed that their intervention in Angola had been based on an understanding with the United States. The intervention was also backed by Zaire and Zambia, with the liberation forces busy fighting each other. The SADF advanced very quickly. Task Force Foxbat joined the invasion in mid-October. The territory the MPLA had just gained in the south was quickly lost to the South African advances, after South African advisors and anti-tank weapons helped to stop an MPLA advance on Nova Lisboa in early October. Zulu captured Rockadas by 20, Sadar Bandira by 24 and Mokamides by 28 October. With the South Africans moving quickly toward Luanda, the Cubans had to terminate the circle at Salazar only 3 days after it started operating, and deployed most of the instructors and Angolan recruits in Luanda. On 3 November 51 Cubans from the Circle Benguela and South Africans had the first direct encounter near Katang, where FAPLA unsuccessfully tried to stop the Zulu advance. This encounter led Zulu commander Breitenbach to conclude that his troops had faced their best organized FAPLA opposition to date. For the duration of the campaign, Zulu had advanced 3,159 kilometers in 33 days and had fought 21 battles, skirmishes in addition to 16 hasty and 14 deliberate attacks. The task force accounted for an estimated 210 MPLA dead, 96 wounded and 50 POWs, while it had suffered 5 dead and 41 wounded. Cuban intervention. After the MPLA debacle at Katang, the Cubans became very aware of the South African intervention. On 4 November Castro decided to begin an intervention on an unprecedented scale, Operation Carlota. The same day, a first airplane with 100 heavy weapons specialists, which the MPLA had requested in September, left for Brazzaville, arriving in Luanda on 7 November. On November 9, the first 100 men of a contingent of a 652-strong battalion of elite special forces were flown in. The 100 specialists and 88 men of the special forces were dispatched immediately to the nearby front at Kifangondo. They assisted 850 FAPLA, 200 Katangans and 1 Soviet advisor. With the help of the Cubans and the Soviet advisor, FAPLA decisively repelled an FNLA Zairian assault in the Battle of Kifangondo on 8 November. The South African contingent, 52 men commanded by General Bender Wetros, that had provided for the artillery on the northern front, had to be evacuated by ship on 28 November. MPLA leader Agostinho Neto proclaimed independence and the formation of the People's Republic of Angola on the 11th of November and became its first president. South African reinforcements. On 6 and 7 November 1975, Zulu captured the harbour cities of Benguela and Lobito. The towns and cities captured by the SADF were given to UNITA. In central Angola, at the same time, combat unit Foxbat had moved 800 kilometers north toward Luanda. By then, the South Africans realized that Luanda could not be captured by Independence Day on the 11th of November, and the South Africans considered ending the advance and retreating. But on the 10th of November 1975, 1975, Vorster relented to UNITA's urgent request to maintain the military pressure with the objective of capturing as much territory as possible before the impending meeting of the Organization of African Unity. Thus, Zulu and Foxbat continued north with two new battle groups formed further inland, and there was little reason to think the FAPLA would be able to stop this expanded force from capturing Luanda within a week. Through November and December 1975, the SADF presence in Angola numbered 2,900 to 3,000 personnel. After Luanda was secured against the north and with reinforcements from Cuba arriving, Zulu faced stronger resistance advancing on Novo Redondo. First Cuban reinforcements arrived in Porto Amboim, only a few km north of Novo Redondo, quickly destroying 3 bridges crossing the Quive River, effectively stopping the South African advance along the coast on 13 November 1975. Despite concerted efforts to advance north to Novo Redondo, the SADF was unable to break through FAPLA defenses. In a last successful advance, a South African task force in UNITA troops captured Luso on the Benguela Railway on the 11th of December, which they held until the 27th of December. End of South African advance. By mid-December, South Africa extended military service and brought in reserves. An indication of the seriousness of the situation is that one of the most extensive military call-ups in South African history is now taking place. By late December, the Cubans had deployed 3,500 to 4,000 troops in Angola, of which 1,000 were securing Cabinda, and eventually the struggle began to favor of the MPLA. Apart from being bogged down on the southern front, the South African advance halted, as all attempts by battle groups Orange and X-Ray to extend the war into the interior had been forced to turn back by destroyed bridges. In addition, South Africa had to deal with 2 other major setbacks: the international press criticism of the operation and the associated change of U.S. policies. Following the discovery of SADF troops in Angola, most African and Western backers declined to continue to back the South Africans due to the negative publicity of links with the apartheid government. The South African leadership felt betrayed, with a member of Congress saying, "When the chips were down, there was not a single state prepared to stand with South Africa. Where was America? Where were Zaire, Zambia, and South Africa's other friends?" Major battles and incidents. Battle of Quifangondo on 10 November 1975, the day before Angolan independence, the FNLA attempted against advice to capture Luanda from the MPLA. South African gunners and aircraft assisted the offensive, which went horribly wrong for the attackers. They were routed by the FAPLA, assisted by Cubans manning superior weaponry that had arrived recently in the country. The South African artillery, antiquated due to the UN embargo, was not any match for the longer-range Cuban BM-21 rocket launch, and therefore could not influence the result of the battle. Battle of Ebo. The Cuban military, anticipating a South African advance towards the town of Ebo, established positions there at a river crossing to thwart any assault. The defending artillery force, equipped with a BM-21 battery, a 76mm field gun, and several anti-tank units, subsequently destroyed 5 to 6 armored cars, whilst they were bogged down with RPG-7s, on November 25, killing 5 and wounding 11 South African soldiers. A Cessna Spotter aircraft was shot down over Ebo the following day. This was the first tangible South African defeat of Operation Savannah. Bridge 14. Following the ambush at Ebo, the South African battle group Foxbat began attempting to breach the Nhia River at Bridge 14, a strategic crossing near the FAPLA headquarters north of Kwibala. This ensuing battle for Bridge 14 accounted for the many fierce actions fought by withdrawing Cuban and Angolan forces from the river inland to Top Hat, a hill overlooking the southern approach to the bridge. In early December, Foxbat had infiltrated the hill with 2 artillery observers, who directed fire on FAPLA positions from a battery of BL 5.5-INCH medium guns. This development forced Cuban commander Raul Arguelles to call off an intended counter-offensive and order a redeployment via Ebo, instructing his units to withdraw from the Nhia. His subsequent death in a landmine explosion caused much confusion in some sectors of the defense line, with several of the defending units overlooking Bridge 14 as a result of a series of miscommunications. Meanwhile, South African sappers started repairing the bridge on December 11, despite heavy FAPLA opposition. By morning, the Cuban situation had worsened, with Foxbat advancing in full force. At about 7 a.m., the defending troops came under attack. Heavy artillery pounded the northern banks, wiping out several mortar positions and at least 1 ammunition truck. The Cubans, supported by ZPU-4S and BM-21 Grads, covered the main road with Saga wire-guided missiles to deter the South African advance. However, a column of 12 Eland 90 armored cars supported by infantry broke through, skirting the road to confuse the missile teams, who had trained the weapons on the center of the bridge. The Elands swiftly engaged the remaining mortars with high explosive shells, routing the crews. 20 Cuban advisors were also dispatched when they attempted to overtake a Lieutenant Van Vuon's armored car in the chaos, possibly mistaking it for an Angolan vehicle. Slowing to let the truck pass, Van Vuon promptly slammed a 90mm round into its rear, killing the occupants. It was during this engagement that Danny Roxo single-handedly killed 12 FAPLA soldiers while conducting a reconnaissance of the bridge, an action for which he was awarded the Honoris Crux. A number of other South African military personnel were also decorated for bravery at Bridge 14, some posthumously. It is estimated that several hundred Cubans lost their lives during the attack. The SADF suffered 4 dead. The events at Bridge 14 were subsequently dramatized by South Africa in the 1976 Afrikaans film Brug 14. Battle of Luzo. On December 10, the South African Task Force X-Ray followed the Benguela railway line from Silverporto east to Luzo, which they overran on 10 December 1975. The South African contingent included an armored squadron, supporting infantry units, some artillery, engineers, and UNITA regulars. The main objective was to seize the Luzo airport, which later went on to serve as a supply point until the South Africans finally departed Angola in early January 1976. Battles involving Battle Group Zulu in the west. There were numerous unrecorded clashes fought in the southwest between Colonel Jan Breitenbach's SADF battle group and scattered MPLA positions. During Operation Savannah, eventually, Breitenbach's men were able to advance 3,000 kilometers over Angolan soil in 33 days. On a related note, Battle Group Zulu later formed the basis of South Africa's famous 32 Battalion. Ambrizette incident. The South African Navy was not planned to be involved in the Heron-to land operation, but after a failed intervention by the South African Army in the Battle of Kwifangando, nevertheless had to hastily extract a number of Army personnel by sea from far behind enemy lines in Angola, as well as abandoned guns. Ambrizette north of Luanda at 7.22361 degrees south, 12.85667 degrees east, minus 7.22361, 12.85667 was chosen as the pickup point for the gunners involved in the defeated Kwifangando. The frigates Shash President Kruger and Shash President Steyn went to the area, where the latter used inflatable boats and its Westland Wasp helicopter to extract 26 personnel successfully from the beach on the 28th of November 1975. The replenishment oiler Shash Tafelberg provided logistical support to the frigates, and picked up the guns in Ambriz after they were towed to Zaire and took them to Walvis Bay. General Constant Viljoen, who had grave concerns at the time about the safety of both his soldiers and abandoned field guns, called it the most difficult night ever in my operational career. The success of this operation was exceptionally fortuitous, given that the South African Navy had been penetrated by the Spider at Gerhardt. Aftermath. South Africa continued to assist UNITA in order to ensure that SWAPO did not establish any bases in southern Angola. The 49 South African casualties during the conflict were never acknowledged by the SADF, who were operating covertly in the country. These soldiers were listed simply as missing rather than killed in action, resulting in a number of Supreme Court cases afterwards to change the status. South African order of battle. The South Africans deployed a number of combat groups during Operation Savannah. Initially, only combat groups A and B were deployed, with the remaining groups being mobilized and deployed into Angola later in the campaign. There has been much dispute the overall size of Task Force Zulu. Current evidence indicates that the task force started with approximately 500 men and grew to a total of 2,900 with the formation of battle groups. Foxbat, Orange and X-Ray Association. The Savannah Association is an association of ex-servicemen of all units who were involved in the operation. They meet annually to commemorate the operation. The insignia of the association is a caltrop.